Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight, both in person and virtually. We are here from Barrett Planning Group, and we are working with the town of Chatham on a visioning process for affordable and attainable housing development on two recently acquired town-owned properties on Main Street and Meeting House Road. So we'll be giving you some information about both of those properties this evening. Just in terms of the agenda for this evening, Gloria is going to tell us a little bit about the project background, and then it's going to come back over to us at Barrett Planning Group to talk a little bit about housing needs in Chatham, looking first at what was learned from the 2018 Housing Production Plan, which was kind of our primary source for learning about housing needs in Chatham, and then kind of looking at what maybe has changed or remained the same 4 years later. And then we'll be going into details about each of the properties, the Main Street property and the Meeting House Road property. There'll be some time for questions interlaced between all of those different topics. And then at the end, we'll have kind of a broader Q&A session as well, and then go over what the next steps are for this process. So with that said, I'm going to briefly turn it over to Gloria McPherson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you. Welcome and thank you for coming to the first of a series of community engagement meetings where we talk about possible development scenarios on the two properties that Alexis mentioned. I'm Gloria McPherson. I'm the Housing and Sustainability Director for the town of Chatham, relatively new. I'm coming up on my 4-month anniversary, so I see some familiar faces, but most of you I don't know. But thank you for coming to the forum. I'd like to give a brief shout out to our town manager, Jill Goldsmith, who's here, and our director of community development, Katie Donovan, who provided a lot of the background information for what we're going to be doing today. And also I see members of the select board here and other town committees and boards. So thank you everyone for coming. So if you want to do the slide. So why are we here? So back in 2020, the town decided that it was going to kind of take control of the housing crisis and issued an RFP for the purchase of land or buildings that could potentially be suitable for affordable housing and attainable housing. And since then, we've issued the RFP a few times, maybe 5 times, with the hopes that people would submit proposals for the sale of their property so that we could purchase it for affordable and attainable housing. Just to give you a sense of what that RFP process is like, just so you understand the timeline, because everyone wants housing, but nothing happens quickly in town government, and especially in housing development, because there are so many steps. Even just the acquisition process takes a long time. So a housing RFP is issued. It's out there for a certain amount of time. Property owners respond to that RFP. They give the town a proposal saying how much they want for their property. The town has to do due diligence. We have to do appraisals. We have to understand the property. We have to make an evaluation to determine whether it's suitable for the development of housing. And then all of this goes into negotiations. It's possible that the offering prices higher than what the land appraises for, and the town can't purchase something higher than what it appraises for, so that's all part of the negotiation. And then ultimately, an approving body has to approve the purchase. And in our case, we had 2 different approving bodies for 2 different properties based on the funding sources for that. And the next slide will go into that a little bit more detail. So we had, we ended up purchasing 2 properties based on proposals that we received from 2 separate RFPs. So we didn't get them in the same one. That's why we keep reissuing it, because different circumstances arise. Different people might be interested in selling at that point. And in fact, we're going to keep doing that. We recently reissued it, and we'll probably do it again in another 3 months. So if you know of anybody. So the first house is on Main Street. It was the former Buckley family property. The old address was 1533 Main Street. And we also bought a property from the Fall River Diocese on Meeting House Road. And those two properties are the subject of this entire community engagement process, which is going to involve meetings like this, as well as a survey in January, which you'll hear more about from our consultants. And now to get into more particulars about the properties, just so you start to understand what we're working with. So the first property is our Main Street property. This was purchased from the Buckley family. There was originally a house on the property that was subdivided out, so the town bought the property without the house, the remainder of it, approximately 2.5 acres for $1.375 million. The funding source was half affordable housing trust funds and half free cash, and that's important for a couple of reasons. So the approval body for the purchase of that was town meeting, because they had to approve the expenditure of free cash. And when you use affordable housing trust funds, it limits the development to affordable housing capital A. So 80% AMI and below, at least 50% of the units have to be that because of the funding sources used. And one of the things I found interesting is the timeline. Just from the time town meeting authorized it to the closing was 5 months. So things take time. And the next property that we're also going to look at is a property on Meeting House Road, which was owned by the Diocese of Fall River. It's across from the church that's over there. This is an undeveloped parcel, unlike the one on Meeting House Road, which had a house and cottages in the back. The parcel's wooded. It's unused. It's actually really beautiful. I walked it the other day. So town meeting authorized, or the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, authorized $525,000 for the purchase of this. Ultimately, we paid $500,000 for it because when we were doing our due diligence as a town and had it surveyed, we realized that the original survey was off and there was actually less land that was owned by the diocese. So the final size of the parcel is 3.5 acres approximately, and the town closed on that for a total of $500,000. And because 100% of affordable housing trust funds were used to purchase this, 100% of the units on that property are going to have to be affordable, capital A, 80% AMI or below. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to our consultant team. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. So we're going to start by talking about housing needs in your community. And as I mentioned, we started by looking at your most recent housing production plan, which was written and approved in 2018. So housing production plans have a life cycle of 5 years in Massachusetts, so it is still your current active housing production plan. And so that's what we wanted to start with, although of course things change, and we wanted to kind of compare and see what has shifted since that plan. So one of the key findings in the 2018 housing production plan was that Chatham's population is aging, and that there are fewer younger people within your community. So we wanted to look and see, is that holding true? And it is still true, and notably, you can't see that in this chart, but we did also look at the county as well, and it's a stronger trend in Chatham compared to Barnstable County as a whole. So right now, the data source that we're using for this is called the American Community Survey. I know that Census 2020 was partially released. So while we have total population counts and housing unit counts and household counts, we don't have more detailed information from the census yet, such as breakdown by age group. So we can't, that'll be the really most accurate picture, to be able to look at 2000 census to 2010 to 2020. But because we don't have that full picture available, instead we are relying on what's called that American Community Survey data. And you can see on the percentage of the population that is 65 plus from 2011 to 2016, so we looked at 5-year intervals, and then 2021, which is the most recent year for which American Community Survey data is available. You can kind of see that steady increase from 35% of your population to 46%. And then the under 18 population decreasing. Although, there was kind of a little bump up in 2016, but that overall trend is trending downward. I thought this was interesting that the 45 to 64 also trending downward as well, and 18 to 44 kind of staying stable. So, but the big thing that jumps out, of course, is that general trend toward an aging population, and more so in Chatham than the county as a whole. Another key finding was there was uncertainty about what Chatham's population projection would look like. And we've seen this on quite a few housing plans that we've recently been working on, is that a lot of the community's previous housing production plans were using various population projection methods. For example, the Donahoe Institute of UMass Amherst, or yep, Amherst, yep. MAPC, Massachusetts, Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. They both put out these population projections for communities through 2030, and both of those projections anticipated that Chatham would see a decrease in population through 2030. But then the last HPP pointed to another regional study that was done that actually thought there might be a modest increase. So it was kind of uncertain what would happen. But what we have seen in the 2020 census is that actually there has been an increase both in total population and households. So part of the reason why those population projections assumed that there would be a decrease is because, there was a pretty significant decrease from census 2000 to 2010, but that shifted back up. So another kind of key finding was that household size was decreasing at the time of the last housing production plan, or your current housing production plan, I should say. So again, because census data for 2020 is not fully available, one of the things that it will include is average household size. We don't have that yet, but we can kind of estimate it by taking your total population and dividing it by your total households. It's important to note that's not going to be exact, though, because your population includes group quarters, like people in, say, nursing homes or other kind of group home settings, things like that, that are, so they're not counted as being part of a household in the traditional sense. So we don't have that data yet from the census, but we are able to kind of just estimate and see that. You can see why the HPP assumed that, because the household size did decrease. But now it seems to be kind of perhaps stabilizing. Another key finding from the 2018 Housing Production Plan was that overall median household income was increasing. However, the income for renter households was decreasing. So things were, likely becoming more challenging for your renter households. And then, so what we've looked at for for that 2021 American Community Survey data shows that there still is that kind of trend upward in median household income. So the increase, though, is stronger for owners than renters. So the median household income increased by 28% for homeowners over the last 10 years, and only 18% for renters. And you can see just kind of how there was quite a blip there in 2016 for the median income for renters versus in 2021. And it's worth noting that the estimated percent of renter households has decreased during that time as well by about 5%, according to the American Community Survey. So you have fewer renter households, fewer rental stock available likely, and so kind of a more competitive market. Another finding that kind of led to a key recommendation in the HPP was that home values increased significantly in Chatham from 2000 to 2010, which had kind of a widening affordability gap. So we wanted to look at the sales prices from 2011 to 2021. And the increase in that 10-year period was about 48% of a price increase. However, it's even more staggering in 2022. We don't have the full year yet because we're still in 2022, but the median sale price in Chatham for a single family home right now is over $1 million. And that's, in 2021, it was just under $1 million, but it has surpassed that for 2022. Okay, so then another key finding as we kind of wrap up on our overview of the HPP. So the housing production plan is really focused on increasing your stock of affordable year-round housing for what's called your subsidized housing inventory. And that is a list maintained by DHCD. And so the target under Chapter 40B is to have 10% of your year-round housing be affordable, capital A affordable, as Gloria referred to it. And the kind of stipulation there is that it needs to be affordable to households earning 80% of the area median income or lower. So that's what one of the requirements for being included on the subsidized housing inventory. So in the 2018 plan, when that was complete, the town had about 5% on the SHI, 5.03% to be exact. And then today, as of this month, although it hasn't changed too much, it's 5.14%. So 178 units of kind of a mix of rental and ownership, mostly rental, but there is significant ownership as well. So that kind of shifts come from, there were 9 units added. Since the HPP, there was a group home with 6 rental units that was added, and then also 3 ownership units. So that's plus 9 since the plan. And then there were also 5 units that were lost through no fault of the towns. This is not unique to Chatham. There were 5 units that had been rehabilitated with a particular program that has since ended. I'm not sure if it was a state program or a federal program, or if you know offhand.
Federal funds administered by the Commonwealth.
Yeah, okay, so that program ended, so when those 5 units, when their affordability restriction ended, they came off the SHI because that program is no longer available to continue supporting those units. And that is not unique to Chatham. So that is kind of it for our overview of the housing production plan. I'm going to talk about what the kind of key needs were in a moment because we have a question about that. But I want to read this quote from the housing production plan that I think really kind of covers a lot of those needs that we just talked about. The convergence of these trends, an aging population, fewer young adults, very high housing prices, lower housing production, little housing diversity, limited supply of rentals, difficulty in obtaining affordable financing, and large upfront cash requirements for home ownership and rentals all point to a challenging affordability gap. If these demographic and housing trends are left to evolve unchecked, Chatham will lose ground on its ability to be a place where individuals and families across a range of economic and social strata can call home. So our first question for you, we want to open it up both to the people in front of us and also virtually. Do you agree or disagree with that quote? Are there certain elements of the quote that you think are most significant to consider in this process when thinking about housing for these properties? So they kind of, in various demographic points are made there, and also just kind of about your housing market. So is there anything in that quote that resonates with you, you agree with, disagree with, and maybe have thoughts for how this opportunity that the town has can rectify some of those situations? What I'm going to do for purposes of recording, we were going to use chart paper, but then I realized that our friends online would have a hard time seeing it. So instead, we're going to type the notes. So I'm going to just change my screen to a full screen of a Word document so I can type the notes so everybody can see whether they are at home or in front of us. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing briefly and then switch what you are going to be seeing. Okay. And I'm going to make that view bigger.
Yes.
Oops. Oh, you know what? I'm going to need to back out for a second. I got to minimize this. Okay.
I think you can just put it on like 150%, Alexis.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. That's usually what I've done. Here you
Yeah,
go.
thank you. All right, so any thoughts either from, I know Katie will be helping us with any comments from our virtual audience, and then anyone here want to weigh in?
We have a microphone set up in the middle of the meeting room, so if anybody would like to comment, if you would come to the microphone in the middle, and any folks online that would like to comment, if you would raise your hand, and I will recognize you through Microsoft Teams. And I do have one hand up online.
And one here as well.
Oh,
Okay. All right, so we'll start online with Rick Levitt.
okay.
Rick, go ahead.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Rick Levitt. My wife and I live in West Chatham Center, and our home abuts the Buckley property. And we certainly appreciate having this opportunity to comment. I'm not just going to comment on this question. I have one or two other comments, and I hope you will indulge me in this. A great deal of public comment has already been received. For example, when the Finance Committee weighed in with a report calling for an increased supply of housing, both rental and owned, across a spectrum of up to 200% of area median income. Chatham needs a mix of market rate, attainable housing and subsidized affordable housing for our diverse workforce and population. Chatham voters approved a comprehensive plan calling for mixing both attainable and affordable housing in these housing developments to avoid building another concentrated low-income housing project in Chatham. Chatham Summer Residents Advisory Committee issued a report calling for density of 10 small single-family homes per acre on small lots as seen in parts of Chatham's Old Village, downtown, and Shattuck Lane behind downtown. I see Phil Richardson is on, and I'm sure he will be commenting on that. And I also see that John Wayland is on from the Finance Committee, and I'm sure he'll be commenting on that. I have personally called for site plan and design concepts recently built over in Brewster and Dennis on historic Route 6A. Both of those traditional cluster housing developments include single family and duplex, attainable and affordable homes surrounding a village green. These successful developments were designed by Union Studio. I only have a little bit more to go, so please indulge me. A troubling aspect of the process that you are following is that only a single architectural firm has been chosen to provide site plan and design concepts. A more prudent approach for major design projects like this, frequently adopted by both public and private sectors, is soliciting site plan and design concepts from more than one architect. There should be at least 3 architectural firms presenting their conceptual ideas, or the public will be deprived of a variety of choices before deciding which concept is appropriate for Chatham's neighborhoods. Finally, I would like Union Studio to present their missing middle design concept. It was developed to make affordable, attainable workforce housing possible in today's inflated housing market. Union Studio's traditional site plans and authentic 2- and 3-bedroom single family and duplex home designs have been adopted by numerous communities on the Cape and can easily be seen today. Union Studio presented their missing middle concept to 5 other towns on the Cape. Let's not shortcut this process. It's too important for Chatham's future, and thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment. Before I respond to any of it, I just want to ask for a couple clarifications just for my own notes. When you talked about the housing developments along 6A, and you mentioned Brewster, and was the second community Dennis that you mentioned with a mix of housing?
Yes, that's it.
Thank you. And then
Yes.
when you talked about Union Studios, the missing middle design concept, which we're familiar with, did you say single family duplex and triplex, or can you just mention the housing types again that you stated?
Well, yes, the 2 in Brewster and in Dennis are single family and duplexes, but the middle missing concept that Union Studio has, as you well know, includes a number of different types of missing middle homes that can be designed for communities that fit beautifully into those communities rather than large apartment buildings or large homes on large lots. So I think we have an important opportunity here to see what this firm has done in other communities right here on the Cape, particularly on the Cape.
Okay, sorry.
I think we had someone with a hand up over here. I'm not trying to manage things too much, but I just noticed her, and I wanted to make sure that before we went to someone else online, that we recognize people in the room.
I live at 95 Meeting House Road. I'm one house over from the Meeting House property where this land is going to be developed. And I'm just asking for clarification on affordable housing. It's my understanding that there's no criteria or requirement
I'm sorry, Miss, do you mind standing just a little bit closer?
Yeah.
They're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just have a basic question about affordable housing, and I'm asking for clarity. It's my understanding that there is no requirement for affordable housing residents to work in Chatham or even work on the Cape. They can get on a bus and go and work in Boston. I don't see how, and I understand the need for affordable housing, but I don't see how some of this or any of it is going to help Chatham with their problem based on there's no requirement, which I find really strange.
Does Chatham have a local preference policy that includes a preference for people who work locally?
I think our intent on these properties was, as we would go through the process, that we can and likely will request the local preference of up to 70%, which the local preference is somebody who lives here, works here, or has a child in the school system. And we can request up to 70%. The entire project cannot be 100% local preference, but we can request up to 70%.
Okay, thank you. And my other question has to do with the development of what it's going to look like. The houses are relatively small, and my hope is that when you develop this, that you will keep in line with the neighborhood and the structures that currently exist. When they cleared the land at 28 and Meeting House Road for the pump station, that was done to an extreme. It was done before the zoning board even heard from the abutters. The land had already been cleared, which is not the way to conduct business. So I hope that in keeping with respect to the abutters, that those kinds of issues will be avoided going forward with this project. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to go back to a couple of the comments here just before I call on anybody else. So I believe we already answered the question about local preference, which is helpful. And then to your question about whether the process will consider neighborhood context, that's some of what we're trying to learn from you tonight, is what are the sorts of things that are very important for each parcel, kind of distinct from each other, but then also as a whole for your community. And then I'll be kind of explaining, perhaps I should have put this process slide earlier in the presentation, but what will happen from what we hear tonight and what we hear from a visual preference survey that I'll be explaining is that the architectural landscape firm that we're working with, Dodson and Flinker, they'll be taking that input and creating a few different scenarios for each site. And then at the next meeting, they will discuss kind of the trade-offs, the feasibility, and so on for each site. But, I imagine you're not going to be the only person that we hear, sensitivity for neighborhood context from. So that's an example of the type of thing that they would take into consideration and also talk about kind of the trade-offs. Does that mean fewer units? Does that mean, you'll need to kind of be creative with funding sources and so on. So we'll kind of make that second meeting really talk about those aspects of the feasibility of each. So I just wanted to make sure we address that. And then back to our first commenter, who the comment about the concern with there only being one architectural firm as part of this process. And Judy, you may want to also speak about the Union Studio work in a moment, but just to kind of calm anyone's concerns about that, the scenarios that Dodson and Flinker will be developing will be refined based on the feedback from the community, but also what they're coming up with is not going to be a definitive plan for the site. The ultimate goal for this process is what we learn from the community, and the concepts that Dodson and Flinker ultimately designs will help the town develop an RFP for the development of each property based on kind of criteria that comes out of that process. So what Dodson comes up with is not necessarily going to be what ends up on the site. That's going to go through a whole approval and permitting process with the town, with a whole lot more opportunity for public comment and whatnot. So I just wanted to hopefully calm that concern. And then Judy, the Union Studio work for the missing middle design concept in the Cape, that's
So they did some work for the Cape Cod Commission, and they had looked at different types of village and neighborhood areas and to sort of show what could be done to accommodate additional housing. And one of the sites they looked at is in Orleans, where we just finished a project with Union Studio on our team to kind of plan the redevelopment of the Governor Prince property. So, you know, I think whether it's Union Studio or Dodson Flinker, I think the real point is we're not designing the project. We're really trying to understand what the concerns of the community are that need to be accommodated or accounted for in what might be called sort of design guidance to potential developers who will eventually come and actually do the project. And whether they hire Union Studio as their architect or somebody else, we don't know. But what is important, I can just tell you because I've worked on RFPs like this before, is that the town needs to be able to give developers some sense of what the town is looking for. And so the beauty of a process like this, with a landscape architect or an architect on the team, is that they're really good at kind of translating what the concerns are into sort of visualization that will be helpful to developers eventually in a disposition process for the property.
Hi, Steve Buckley. What you just said, I mean, I would, as constructive criticism about how to explain to people what's going on, your presentation should have, you showed the graph of the, buying the land, and then it's like where we are now, and then it should have been like, and then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then it'll go to town meeting, so, and this will be your chance, don't worry. This is where the concept, and to let people know, because I think a lot of people have had experiences with the government before where next thing they do, they turn around, the fix is in. Oh, you missed that meeting. You missed it. Or from what you've told us at the last session, this is what we're going to do. And you're like, no, I didn't say that. Or anyway, so if people don't attend this particular meeting, yes, the idea is that you don't lose your place in line or your opportunity. So I would just suggest that perhaps at the next meeting, or even now if you have, maybe you have a graphic handy that shows that, maybe you were going to show it after this exercise here. That's my, I think people can understand that there will be plenty of opportunities for input, and they won't, and so for,
And we have that graphic,
okay.
but not
well,
here.
it's a oh, okay. Oh, we
Okay.
do. Oh,
Yeah, we
yes.
do have that graphic.
Yeah,
Next
okay.
meeting.
tonight we had-
That's my
Next
suggestion.
meeting. Thank you.
I,
That's a
I
good
Thank you.
point.
appreciate that, and that is an excellent point. I'll pull it up actually after we hear from this individual.
Hi, I'm Megan Story. I also live on Meeting House Road, and I just want to echo that I was on the zoning board when that came through for the end of Middle Road, and I recognize the challenge, and it won't happen again. That's not, we're not going to clear cut the land without some sort of plan in place, and I feel very strongly about that too, so I just want you to know. I am on the Affordable Housing Trust, so have been part of this process from the beginning, was aware of some of the feedback that came through when that clear cutting did happen, because Unfortunately for the Affordable Housing Trust, it happened at the same time as we purchased the property, so people assumed it was us, because the property is right next door. So just be aware that this process is going to happen as they say, and that there will be a lot of input. I'm sure more than a lot of input from those of us on Meeting House and on Main Street.
Thank you. So let me just, to Mr. Buckley's point, let me just go over kind of that general timeline, and then we'll invite any other comments. So after this meeting, we're gonna talk about each site during this meeting, and I want to kind of hear from you based on what you learned tonight, if there's anything that you didn't know about each property, what things you think might be appropriate for each site. So based on what we hear, from not only this meeting, but also from a visual preference survey that will be launched through in the month of January. Dodson and Flinker, the landscape architectural firm that we are working with, is going to be working on some concepts for each site. We've already done site visits with Dodson and Flinker on both properties, so they've already visited, walked, every little bit of each property that they could, and so they have, a pretty good understanding of what the challenges are associated with each site and what could potentially be done, and they want to hear community input as well. So at that meeting, Dodson and Flinker will share those concepts and go over kind of those trade-offs, the feasibility of each scenario, and get input on from the community about concerns they may have about each scenario. So then, based on feedback from that and what we learned from Dodson and Flinker at that time, the Affordable Housing Trust, in conjunction with the Select Board, will determine one or two concepts for each parcel that Dodson and Flinker will then be refining. So those meetings with the Housing Trust and or Select Board, those would be public meetings like any others, and advertised as part of this process, discussing those scenarios. And then at the third meeting, which date is to be determined at this time, but the final concepts, 1 to 2 for each property, would be presented to the public, and the kind of reasons why that probably makes the most sense. And the hope, again, is that those concepts then, I'm not sure, Katie, if the town's given thought to like who would be writing that RFP for each parcel. Is it the community development department with the housing trust? How's that going to look?
So we've begun determining whether or not town staff will actually write that, or if we'll work with a consultant to have that written as well. So we've just begun to have those discussions. But if we feel that we need further expertise, we will work with a consultant to do that.
Okay, great. And so that RFP then, once a developer is selected to develop the property, that's when kind of all those permitting conversations would happen. But the developer would be informed by this whole process. Okay. All right. So then there was another. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for coming. Could you pull the mission statement up again for the Housing Trust? There's a couple of things, if you can grab it again.
Oh, I don't know. I shared a quote from the HPP. That
Right,
was what
that's what I'm looking
for. Oh, sure.
for.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Okay.
So I agree with every sentence of that statement. I think some of the most important things are the housing diversity side of what is lacking in Chatham, obviously, rentals and housing, and housings of all different kinds. One thing that isn't in this statement, in this quote, is a pathway to ownership, meaning a rent-to-own opportunity. Because oftentimes we have we have a Marconi program in Chatham where you can rent the house and it's an equity build. However, we've not had one single person buy a house in Chatham after they fulfilled the term of their lease. And that's the unfortunate piece there. And I think that, when you have young professionals or young working families in town and you have a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, or you've got a home that is, a small modest home is built and then you can rent it and then possibly own it at the end of the day. That's lacking in this community. It's lacking in a lot of communities, and I think that builds on community sustainability. It builds on the idea that people, want to participate in their community. And I feel that that's a really important piece that is missing out of this. And when I speak to the 70% preference issue, that's great, and providing opportunity for Chatham residents should be a priority for us. However, there's a lot of people that have moved out of town that have ties to the community and don't qualify into that at all. Especially as somebody who's lived here all my life and raised my children here, you know, I have one daughter who has had the opportunity to be able to own a home in Chatham, and the other one lives in another town. She would never have the opportunity to move back to Chatham. And they both work in town, which is fortunate. But there's a lot of my friends, my contemporaries, that have kids that have moved out and moved to other parts of the Cape and can't afford to live back in Chatham. So I think that these kind of things are important to consider when we think about the 70%. But I also want to say, when somebody actually turns a key and opens a door and lives in Chatham, they are a Chatham resident from that day forward. Thank you.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, for clarification, what was the program that you mentioned that exists in Chatham, but there has not been any?
Marconi rental program.
Okay, thanks.
Or whatever. I don't know what it's officially called.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I'm just curious. Thank you.
We do have an online question or comment from Tracy Cannon, and then we could go back to the live audience. Sure. Go ahead, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of the Chatham Housing Authority, as well as the Vice Chair of the Housing Partnership. I just wanted to briefly, was just trying to comment back to the first gal that spoke that lives on Meeting House Road regarding the local preference. I just wanted to reassure her, because I know there is a lot of misinformation out there. I'm the monitoring agent for Lake Street Apartments, as well as my own housing authority. And Lake Street was tasked with being 75% local preference. And I just did their annual renewal, and they're at 98% local preference right now. So I just wanted to reassure people that even though I know there's a concern at all times that if you put housing in, there's going to be no stopping people from moving from off Cape down here. It just organically doesn't happen. My housing at the Housing Authority is, I have, we have preferences, we have local preferences, and veteran preferences. And I know that it's a big concern for a lot of people out there. And it just, people don't move to the Cape to live in affordable housing. It just doesn't happen. All of the people that we lease up, in my 10 years at the Housing Authority, I think I've leased up maybe 3 people from off Cape, and they get and everybody gets a local preference. So if you're living in the town now, I understand where what Shereen's talking about too, where it's hard because people that have grown up in this town can't come back and buy in this town, and that's very hard. But as far as the rentals that I manage are concerned, just in general, it never drops ever below 75% local preference. And also, just to you guys, if anybody has any questions regarding the Marconi project, I also run that. So anyway, I just wanted to reassure that the gal, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but the gal that spoke at the beginning about the local preference, because I know it's a big concern for a lot of people. So.
I think we have a question here.
Is there any chance that I could come over there, because my eyesight's not so hot and I could get a little more light?
Oh, sure.
Good evening, everybody, and happy holiday. Thank you for reaching out to your community and presenting an informational presentation on affordable housing, attainable housing projects in Chatham. We have a few questions, and I hope the Housing Board will respond tonight to our queries. Number 1, in less than a month, we have had 2 criminal crimes committed by residents of affordable housing facilities, one living in Lake Street Complex in Chatham and one on Route 28 in Harwich Housing. One incident under investigation resulted in the death of an occupant, and the other in a hold up at gunpoint. Anyone living in Chatham has to consider locking their cars and homes as a result of a Lake Street resident following a man from an ATM machine in Hyannis and taking his money at gunpoint. How can we make sure this does not become a common occurrence within affordable housing developments? What measures have been put in place to check past police records and to process background checks? How do we ensure the safety of other residents in the affordable housing community and the rest of our town? Please give us some reassurance. We know that we have a terrific police force, but the applications for affordable lottery must have safety measures in place as well. Number 2 question, we need a clear explanation of the process used for accepting applicants for affordable, attainable housing. We understand the monetary salary requirements and ceilings. What are the additional criteria? We have heard that single women and men are a lower priority compared to young adults with children. Reason, the need to compensate for the lower yearly attendance in our Chatham school classrooms. If this is the case, it means that young singles working in Chatham have less chance of winning the lottery. It also means elderly applicants are at risk of failing to move to affordable units and downsize from their present homes, which are no longer sustainable to those on fixed income. Please provide us with a priority list that is used to process applicants as well as to make the final decisions on lottery winners. Number 3 question. We know what our taxpayer funds have purchased to date. 2 parcels of land for a little less than $2 million. What we don't know is how much we have already spent on designs, project manager fees, engineering fees, trustee expenses, and all the unknown expenses ahead. Do we, the citizens of Chatham, pay for installation of utilities, sewer, solar panels, laying of new roads and cut cul-de-sacs, generators, air conditioning and heating, and all related home construction costs? Can we assume that with the new energy building codes in place, called, I believe, Stretch, it will necessitate all affordable and attainable units and houses to be built solely for use of electric heat, cooling, and accessory generators? Please give us a realistic breakdown of the total costs for the 2 upcoming projects, keeping in mind the most recent rises in the cost of building in Chatham. And I realize that's down the road. But what are we responsible for financially? And what would a developer who agrees to work on these projects be responsible for? What kind of incentives is the Housing Trust planning to offer developers to bring them into these projects? They're going to want to make money. This major long-term capital project will affect our tax bill directly, as well as through the continuing use of CPA funds and free cash. And we need to plan for the future. Some on fixed income may not be able to stay in Chatham, as these ongoing affordable housing projects will continue and the cost will be great. Finally, we request a full disclosure of how the town plans to deal with the required infrastructures for hundreds of new residents living in brand-new houses and rental units. Just last weekend, during the Christmas stroll events, we had another brief power outage. Eversource blamed it on equipment failure. The same company, months ago, warned there will be deliberate power outages this winter due to a lack of enough fuel and electric resources. The affordable projects slated for Chatham will require more year-round potable water and gas and electricity. At present, many of our wells are out of service for annual maintenance and testing, and some are not used at all during winter months, as the population drops dramatically. That will be changed by new year-round, affordable, attainable communities. How are the town administrators and the Affordable Housing Trust planning to mitigate these serious problems? thank you for any answers to these inquiries. We want to be informed, as we, the taxpayers of Chatham, are the sponsors of this challenging project. Thanks.
Thank you.
How do you want to respond?
Sure. So obviously, some of those questions, we certainly can't answer tonight, as based on the fact that we haven't come up with a design proposal. We haven't crafted an RFP at this point in time. But I do know that I believe that Tracy Cannon had raised her hand, and I don't know if she wanted to respond, as she actually does the lotteries for the properties, for the Marconi program and for the Housing Authority, so she may be able to answer some of the lottery-specific questions.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I don't, the lottery stuff, again, it kind of depends on, we need to get a little further down the road before we can answer how the lotteries will be structured, because it depends obviously on what is going to go there. I mean, obviously what we decide, so we're at the very beginning here of trying to decide what's going to go in. Is it going to be 80% AMI? Is it going to be 120%? Is it going to be 200%? So all of that stuff is going to have to, we'll have to be looking at that as we go along. But again, it's something that can be discussed, and it's something that I, encourage everybody to give input on. I think it's I think we can, there are different ways to do it, basically. And once we figure out what's going there, we can figure out what we want to, how we want to approach it from a lottery standpoint. I did want to speak very briefly to the crime piece. I just wanted to say that we've done studies over the years, because that is another, I'm not going to call it a myth, but I would say it is an exaggeration that, these affordable housing brings crime. We actually asked the police chief of 5 or so years ago to do a study for us, and it turned out that I believe it was less than, just over 1% of all calls to the police station had anything to do with affordable or low-income housing. The gentleman that she's speaking of up on Bell Road is not a tenant. He's somebody that knew a tenant up there. But there's a, I don't know what the statistics are now. The police chief could probably tell us, but I know that it is. I do believe it is a bit of a myth that this will bring crime, because I know that it's not. My neighborhood down on Kroll Road is, we have minimal. I mean, we have a lot of EMT calls because we have an elderly population, but we have minimal police calls. So I just want to be, I just want to be sure that everybody understands that, that is not, bringing in affordable housing is not going to increase the crime rate in the town of Chatham. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. And Chief Anderson is here, if he's able to make a brief, Chief Anderson is here, if he's able to make a brief comment.
Thank you. I did bring some data from that study that Tracy referred to. It was 2017. And we looked at 7 geographical areas of affordable housing in town. And I don't have the actual report, but I just have the basic statistics. There were 32,566 total calls for service townwide. Out of that 32,000, 1,905 came from affordable housing locations. The affordable housing locations represent 5.85% of the police calls for service in 2017. So that is a very low number. Affordable housing locations represent 7.7 of the criminal offenses in town of 2017. If we were to do another study, which I'd be happy to do if we need it, I would expect those numbers to either stay the same or lower, simply because since 2017, the overall crimes in town in general, we've been in a very favorable trend of low crime rate and decreasing crime in town. We've been very favorable, very lucky. And again, just to confirm what Tracy said, I can't speak for the incident in Harwich, But I can say that the incident that was recently in town here, the subject involved was not a Chatham resident or a housing authority resident. He was an associate of someone on the lease there, so if anybody else has any questions. Okay,
Thank you, Chief.
thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments online?
I see Rick Levitt has his hand up.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, all of the social studies that have been made and all of the studies of town planning that have been made deal with this subject and deal with the problem. And the way it's solved is simply you have mixed income housing, not housing that is all one low income or all higher income. You mix them together. That's the brilliance of Chatham's comprehensive plan. It's there. Take a minute to read it. Take an hour to read it. But you mix when we develop, as we should, our need for a diverse workforce and population. We want to see a mix of incomes, not concentrated low income or concentrated high income. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have no more hands up online.
Okay, all right, great. So I'm going to go back to the presentation just to go over the next question relating to the housing production plan in particular, and then we'll move on to talking about each of the properties and the kind of specifics for each property. All right. Oh, I am going to have to go back though, because now oh no, you know what, I'm going to exit. I'm on the totally wrong slide from trying to skip ahead to show you the process slide, so just give me just a moment. All right, now I'm on the right side. Okay, so another thing we wanted to point out from the 2018 Housing Production Plan that really led to a lot of the plan's goals and strategies were these kind of high priorities, and it boiled down to 4 priorities in the plan. And we want to hear from you. Of this list, what do you think is the highest priority today? Why? And then how can the opportunities on these 2 properties help address these needs? So the 2018 Housing Production Plan found that the lack or the need for affordable year-round housing was a top priority, rental housing, affordable year-round rental housing, affordable home ownership opportunities, home improvement resources such as deferred maintenance, lead remediation, septic system repair or replacement. And then the 4th high priority need being barrier-free accessible units and supportive services to meet the needs of an aging population and those with disabilities. So these were the 4 really key needs identified in the 2018 Housing Production Plan. And we would like to hear from you. Are there any of those that you think today are really especially significant and that this opportunity with these 2 properties can really help address? And then lastly, are there any other needs not identified? That's what was found in 2018 as being the key priorities. We heard some other good feedback this evening. Any other needs that you would add?
Hello, I'm Carolyn McClellan. I'm Chair of the Community Housing Partnership. And push it down. How's that? Okay. Carolyn McClellan, Chair of the Community Housing Partnership. I would just like to say certainly that the top two items there, the year-round rentals and housing ownership opportunities would be top of my list. Obviously, from everything you've already heard and the work you've already done, the rentals are so needed. And I just want to speak to a comment before about, not having, the town having to overspend its resources to develop this housing, or even the water, not having enough water. And this is about our values. If we want to control how the town uses its resources, we can make lots of different choices. You can look in the mirror and decide if you're personally using too much water on your lawn, rather than deny someone housing, never mind home ownership or just housing. These are things we just need to do as a community. And I had a statistic from Brewster that they had 70 people apply for 5 one-bedroom units. I mean, it's just, the need is overwhelming. And just in regards to specifically Chatham people, people in the Lower Cape, people who live here, whether they lived here 10 years ago and moved away, or whether they work here, they're part of our community. We can't get hung up on this one type of pedigree, that we can only have those people, and we really have to build for those people specifically. Obviously, we want to include the people who are here and make sure that they're allowed to be in the lottery, that they qualify, but it can't be them or no one. We have to have a bigger tent. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Hello, I'm Janet Whittemore, 727 Main Street in Chatham. I would just like to say, I would love to see whatever we're going to build these housing will be sustainable products, and that our emphasis will be with concern for our environment, which would include solar. And I definitely agree with Rick Lovett's points. I feel that just one company you mentioned I'm a little perplexed why the town has just chosen one company. I know that my experience in the past is that you ask for input from multiple, and why did the town choose Dodson? I would like to see that transparency. And my last statement is, we have an aging community in Chatham, and I have a lot of friends who are contemporaries, and that can't afford housing here. Is there going to be housing for elderly included? And I love the idea that mixed use. We need a community, not with people here, people there. A mixed community makes for a better community. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Sure, if I could just clarify that when we began the process of looking at this community engagement, the town did put out an RFP. Barrett Consulting Group Barrett Planning Group responded to that RFP amongst, I believe, 1 or 2 other firms. So we did go through the transparency process. We did it appropriately. We put out an RFP. They made a proposal that we thought was appropriate, and we entered into a contract with Barrett Planning Group, who was also consulting with Dodson and Flinker. So the appropriate process was followed.
Thank you, everybody. This has been very informative for me. My name is Joan Craig, and I live in West Chatham, and I am of the aging population. But I also agree with what Shireen said earlier. When I see young individuals leaving the Cape, moving over the bridge, but working here, and I also see so many businesses in town that are either closing or shutting down Mondays and Tuesdays, Wednesdays, cutting their hours during the day, during the summer. This is a destination place. We are in trouble, as is many destination places throughout, and the Cape especially. I agree with the mixed individuals that could live together. I also agree with the idea that individuals who did grow up in Chatham and want to come back to Chatham have the ability to put their name in. I think that's something that we could look at. I'm concerned that we are an aging population. We need the youngsters. When I see the graph that you show, and that I think you said somewhere around the 18 to 40 years, it's sort of leveled off. That's a good thing, but I also think those individuals are leaving because they can't afford to rent here. There's nothing to rent here, let alone buy. And I also liked the idea of renting with the possible future option to buy. So that's just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone online with comments?
Yes, we do have one person online with their hand raised. Sorry, I apologize. I hit the wrong button.
Yeah, it's Rick Levitt again.
Okay, Rick, if you will hold it for just one moment, we have someone at the microphone, and then we'll get to your question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Gloria Hicks, 95 Meeting House Road. I feel very strongly that the property being developed, one house over from me, remain rental. I own a home. I know how much it costs to maintain a home. And if you're having a hard time paying rent or owning a home in Chatham, it's just unreasonable to think that people are going to keep up with the property. We already have a rat problem in the neighborhood, which I don't expect to get any better. And the town has been called about that twice. And we need some kind of a maintenance organization to be able to call, to be able to contact for issues. There's already issues on the street. I mean, Chief Anderson can speak to the traffic on 137 and the speeding that goes on there. We don't have a sidewalk. There are a lot of issues in the neighborhood currently. So it's very expensive to own a home in Chatham. So I really hope that this remains rental because I don't see people keeping up. It's hard to keep up with property in Chatham. Thank you.
So if we could go to Rick Levitt, and then another question from the live audience after that.
I think you have actually two from the audience, so.
Okay.
Am I up, Katie?
Yes, go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. I obviously want to thank one of the previous speakers for mentioning me and the concept of mixed income. I want to stress simply that that concept is not new. It's been around for centuries. It's the authentic community that Chatham was 50, 60, 70 years ago, before the changes have occurred. We had mixed income village centers where people live together of all incomes. That is the path back to where we want to get to preserve Chatham's cultural legacy. The other issues that are being brought up here are all legitimate and they can be dealt with. But the most important issue that we're facing is deciding as a community amongst ourselves, do we want to live together or do we want to live in a segregated community? Thank you.
Just to point out with regard to socioeconomic diversity in these communities, there will be somewhat of a challenge because you have to fit it within the confines of what's legally acceptable. So I think that, you know, we shouldn't be expecting multi-million-dollar houses and low-income housing in a development. And I hear a little of that, so I want to point that out. But I also think it's important to note, and I have connections in both. I'm married to a commercial fisherman, I work in hospitality, and I work off Cape for Google. So I have like a whole bunch of different perspectives into what is going on with young professionals. And actually I have an elderly mother on Cape too. So like, I think that we need to recognize that there's some thinly veiled, I'm going to call it socioeconomic discrimination happening here, and that we're very concerned about the 70% being connected to Chatham, but that doesn't look like it did 40 years ago. And I think that we need to be aware of that when we are talking about it and being inclusive. It's not going to necessarily look like only fishermen or only, Chatham of the 1980s. There are a lot of people here now. They've come to work at Chatham Bars Inn. They make good salaries, not enough to buy a $1 million house, but good salaries. They work in restaurants. They work in Boston, and they still don't make enough money to live here. So I just want to make sure that we are opening ourselves and being really, truly inclusive and not just thinking about that 70% as sort of Chatham of the 80s, which is what I generally hear when I'm listening.
Thank you.
Okay, just also I want to echo what Mr. Levitt said about the mixed income, having a broad range of different AMIs and housing size in a given unit. I wholly support. But I also want to speak to one of the previous comments about affordable housing ownership, those folks being able to maintain their properties. I live in an affordable house. You can come by my house anytime and see if it meets the standards. None of my neighbors have a problem. We do have a broad range of people in this community. I know there's some people who own their own property. They're not affordable housing, and the town has had to do a lot to try to get them to take care of their property. It's come up many times at different boards. So it doesn't matter whether you're in affordable housing or if you're a private citizen. Different people have different perspectives on what they want to do with their homes. And I would say that for the most part, those in affordable housing are under more scrutiny and are more aware of the fact that if they have something out in their lawn or something, someone's going to call and complain. Whereas the private citizen can do whatever they want and nobody complains about it. But there's certainly a lot of folks out there that do that. And I think it's inappropriate to target people because they're of lower income, that they're not going to be good stewards of their property. Thank you.
Thank you.
One suggestion about a need is that the, relating to a lot of the transparency and public engagement, I would suggest that there've been other projects in the past where a dedicated web page has been set up, and so that people don't have to figure out, well, do I go to this committee or do I go here or where do I find it on the website? Even if is that if there was a dedicated web page, then yes, everybody could land there. There could be concept drawings, what happened at the last meeting, the PowerPoint from tonight's meeting, maybe perhaps an email alert function, so every time something was added to the web page, you get an email to tell you something new is there, and you won't get lost in the shuffle and so forth and so on. So I think, because I think the main enemy to a lot of this going through is the fact when people get confused, they say no. And so the more they know and the more you can make it understandable, what's the difference between affordable and attainable? Oh my goodness, there's just a whole lot of stuff to confuse people. So anything to make it more transparent and more clear to the average person, I think more people will buy into it that much sooner. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's a great
Stephen. And that is
suggestion.
something that we had anticipated that we would be doing as we move forward, is to have a dedicated website for the projects as we move them forward. We do have another hand raised online, Tracy Cannon.
Hi, I just wanted to speak really quickly to what Megan was just saying about the different, I'm noticing a really big, a new thing. I've been in this for 10 years and I'm noticing a really difficult new thing. And that is the workers that she was talking about. I have multiple families. I've actually got 3 families right now that I'm working with that are making too much money to live in my housing. So they're over 80% AMI. They are one is a personal care, home health care aide, works in a nursing home. One is somebody works in a kitchen at Wequassett. These are like just classic, like, mainstream Chatham workers. But they're working really, really, really hard, and they're making a really good living, but it's too much money to live in my housing, but it's not enough to be able to afford anything. So I think that's where when you start to get into that, that's a whole demographic that we need to be very sensitive to. I've never seen anything like it before. I've never, ever seen the wave that I'm seeing right now of people that are able to make money, and they're enough to make more than the 80%. But they, even though they're up at maybe 100%, they can't afford to live here because there's nothing for anybody in that in-between place. So I just want to be sure that that they're considered, that is considered in deciding who goes in, where this whole mix. I love the idea of the mixed income population, but that's a fastly growing need, I think, in this town.
Thank you. And when we talk about each of the properties in a couple minutes, I'm glad you made that point, because we will talk about kind of that definition of affordable, which for one of the properties in particular, all of the units would need to fit that definition, but for the other, there's more flexibility. So I'm glad you brought up that point. Thank you.
And we have Rick Levitt again with his hand up. Rick, did you just, is your hand up, or did you not put it down from the last time?
No, my hand is up, and
Great,
I wanted
thanks.
to thank, I just wanted to briefly comment on Tracy's comment. She's absolutely right. One of the things about the Brewster Landing project over in Brewster was 28 homes. 8 of them were so-called affordable homes, and 20 were so-called attainable homes. The affordable homes sold for $200,000. That was 3 or 4 years ago. They'll be a little higher now. But that family you were talking about, Tracy, could easily afford a $200,000 home, earning the income that they were earning. So that's where we're going. It's I call it a pregnant concept. It's a wonderful concept. It's new, except that it is very, very old. We've done it here throughout the centuries in Chatham. Mixed income families living together. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was one more comment, and then just for time's sake, we'll move on to discussion of each property.
Hi, I just wanted to address one of those points that you had there. You talk about mixed economic diversity, which is wonderful, but nobody's really addressing people with disabilities, and barrier-free is wonderful. Bringing in different economic situations adds diversity, but so does capabilities. Just because you have a ramp or a little sidewalk barrier does not make an apartment accessible. Stairs, toileting, showering, they're a big barrier, and people may not be able to find that in the community here with rentals or housing. And if they do, they have to put it in themselves, which is a large economic burden on them. We have, as you cited, an aging population. They may need these fixtures in place and would have to leave or go to more of an institutional type of housing, which they may not need that specialized care, but they just can't access their bathroom correctly. And changing a home dynamics may not be feasible in these older homes. So I think that really needs to be looked at and addressed. To me, that's a large concern, especially with an aging population, but also with a younger population, where if there's a younger person in a home that is aging out and would like to be independent, they can't afford to be here in Chatham with an ADA accessible housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, these are all very helpful comments, and I think we will move on now to taking a look at each of the properties, and I'll try to be as brief as I can, just out of respect for your time, but also because a lot of these specifics of the kind of existing conditions on each site will be gone over more in the second meeting when Dodson and Flinker talks about kind of why there may be limitations on each site and why that's going to kind of control what can be done as well. So, okay. All right. So first we're going to talk about the Main Street property. As Gloria pointed out earlier, I won't run through all this again because she already discussed it, but this was authorized in town meeting, by town meeting in 2021, and then the town closed on the sale recently in November, so there's quite a process there. But this property is the first one that we will be discussing. We did a site walk on Monday, actually. The property, so there are some kind of differences between each property that are important to note. So the Main Street property is relatively flat compared to the Meeting House Road property, so I'll show you kind of those differences. It does kind of slope slightly down from the road toward the back of the property. And in terms of uses, there are varying uses around the property. So both sides, on one side it's directly abutting the property, and on the other it's a couple of properties down, but there's motels abutting or near both sides. Across Main Street, there's Weldon Way Apartments, which are small multifamily. Both sides of Main Street, a little ways down, are zoned for some commercial development. And then behind the lot, there's a lot of single-family subdivisions that you'll see in a moment. It is zoned as residential 20, which the big thing there is the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. And so depending on the permitting route that the town goes for this property, these zoning parameters may not need to be adhered to. However, it is helpful for understanding neighborhood context, the kind of built environment around you. This property is currently sewered, and it is in a historic business district. So just kind of looking at the property here. So this you'll see more when we look at the Meeting House Road property. The fact that these lines here that indicate depth of the property, these topography lines, are spaced fairly far apart, shows that it's not any sort of steep drop on the property. So that is one thing to keep in mind that can make kind of development a bit less challenging. And then these darker red areas that I mentioned, these are the areas that are currently zoned as commercial. But then behind the property, you can see, kind of just a lot of residential subdivisions. So there's kind of a variety of uses going on around the property. So with some of that in mind, what types of housing, and we heard a lot about this already in terms of a lot of comments about having kind of mixed housing types, mixed income levels, things like that. But, given kind of the context of the built environment around it, is there any kind of housing type in particular that you think might be most appropriate for this site? And what should be taken into consideration when planning for this site? I know we kind of touched on a lot of that already, but thinking about this site in particular, if there's any specifics.
Joan Craig again. Certainly don't want a four-story anything. I like the presentation of Lake Street. I've always found that is a really nice-looking area, and the individuals that live there, to my knowledge, as I go by often, keep it nice. And I like the fact that type of setup, sort of like townhouse, attached townhouse, I guess, would fit very well in the property, the Buckley property. I think something like that would look very good. I don't think it has to be long. I think it can be situated in such a way that the townhouses fit to the property lines. So that's one thing I think that we could consider. I know there are motels, some of which quite frankly, are not that attractive. However, perhaps by doing something attractive next door that we're talking about here, that maybe some of those would be upgraded also. So I think something like that would certainly fit very well into the property.
Thank you. And can I just to clarify, did you say Lake Street? Yes. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Megan again. I know people love the, the historic district downtown, single-family on tiny lots. This particular property might be well-suited for that. I'm not an architect or a land designer, so I don't know, but because it can be mixed income, it would be, it might be appropriate for sort of single-family affordable housing, in which case we could maybe make it look like the what everybody loves about Chatham, that sort of beautiful end of Main Street, perfect little cute neighborhood.
Can you just say the name of the property?
Somebody else can.
Okay, okay.
It's the old village that I'm referring to, but I didn't know if that was like.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, hi, Steve Buckley, executor of the Joseph P. Buckley estate, which sold 2.5 acres to the town. And I certainly, yes, when there was an RFP for affordable housing, it's been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. So I didn't want to jump in first as far as what goes there. But grew up in Chatham, but spent 25 years in Washington, D.C. area, in which case I lived in garden apartments, garden condos, which are very nice, and which allowed for big open areas. But we also lived, my wife and I and our 2 small children at that time lived in townhouse, brand new townhouse development in Bowie, Maryland. And they look very nice. I'd say they even look nicer than the ones that are in Chatham. So townhouse developments attached can look very classy, I'd like to think, and we're very fond of the space we had there. In fact, we had more space in our townhouse, 3-level, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath townhouse, than the single-family homes in Bowie, Maryland, which had no basement. So people would come over and say, wow, you have more space than we do. So anyway, yes, so that's the one thing that I would think. And the advantage, people like single-family homes, and so the idea that even if you put them really close together, they don't want to touch, because something when they touch, it leaves. But to have an alley, if you put them together, it's all the more room for the kids to play and for there to be room. I always envision that. And personally, I would like to see something where when I drive by and when people drive by that property in the future, they look over and they see kids playing in the front. Like there's a green area in the front, and they move the houses to the back and they can touch to make room for that area there, to be able to do that. So whether it's kids playing or yard sales or something like that, people look over and they see that. They see, oh, there's a bunch of people doing stuff over there. Gives you that sense of community and the fact that, that it shows that it's vibrant. I don't want to see fences or the butt ends of townhouses or something like that facing the road. So, but Phil Richardson, who you see there on the screen, came up with a concept design. He put his own money into a concept design for the what could happen on 1 square acre of land. But he also, at my request, about a year ago, I said, what would it look like? What if you took that concept design and applied that to this 2.5 acres? So somewhere, and that would be something just to not, and they're not townhouses, but it's a starting point to show people that it doesn't have to look like affordable housing. It doesn't have to look bad. It can look nice. In fact, I think it looks more like Chatham, makes it look more like Chatham, because a lot of the housing that's gone in the past, 20 or 30 years looks less like Chatham than I grew up here. So if you want to go back and capture the character of Chatham, I think that's one place to start. And I think it was presented to the the Select Board about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, and they seemed to like the concept design. So if that 2.5 acre PDF drawing could be put up on the website as just to show people, oh, that looks pretty good for this, and it's actually for this particular property. So it's not set in stone, and I would say don't say this is what's going to happen. It's just one concept design. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it is very helpful. We've seen those concepts and shared them with our team. And it is helpful, I think, for visualizing what can fit. So that, yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other comments about? Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
Sure, could we just hear from Phil? And then we'll go to Carolyn?
Yep.
Sure. Go ahead, Phil. I think you just need to unmute, Phil.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah, it's good that Steve talked because I've been talking to him about his property, and I'm from California, and out here density is necessary because we have some pretty big communities. So I thought that for Chatham, the main thing to do was that people would like to live in single-family houses. So I just picked 10 units an acre as a density number, and I had my architect out here design a project for Steve's property, and they're all Cape Cod houses, and they're all around 1,200 square feet, and we put 25 of them on Steve's property, and they can be 2, 3, and 4 bedroom, and they're all within the concept developed by my architect. And we also included a little farmer's area, and most of the houses surround a little common area too. So, yeah, I'm not saying this is what should be done, but it's a concept I think is good for Chatham because it's single-family houses and they're 2-story. They're not taller than 2-story, and everybody has their own yard and their own property. So I think that would be something that would be at least one type of project to look at. And in general, we have to either do affordable, single family or rental, and then you can get you can get more density with rental. So the architects will have a lot of issues to deal with. So, but we will probably have a limited amount of land, even though we're doing very well right now. So the density is an issue. And the style of the house is an issue, and the diversity of income is also another issue. So if we have a property like Meeting House, which is now, according to the purchase process, going to be all affordable, that might be something that maybe we could somehow have adjusted. So thank you very much. I think we're on the road here for Chatham, and I hope we can get something done soon.
Thank you. And just to clarify, and Phil, thank you for bringing this up as well. Again, that contrast between the Meeting House Road property and this Main Street property is that for this property, 50% of the units would need to be capital A affordable because it was funded 50% by the Affordable Housing Trust, and then the remaining 50% would be that kind of attainable definition. And there was the point made that the town should be very transparent and clear about what that means. I believe in the RFP that was up to 200% of area median income was kind of the town's definition of what attainable would look like. So for this Main Street property, it'd be a mix of that capital A affordable and then also up to 200% potentially.
Hello, Carolyn McClellan again. I just want to point out, for one, my preference almost always is I lean more towards home ownership opportunities. But I think on this particular site, I would be an advocate for doing density, attractive density, whether it's the townhouses or something like Phil's plan. But I also want to make sure, I would like for this property to have some rentals and some 1-bedrooms. I think we need single-bedroom units there. So if you mix it all up, that would be great. But I would really be disappointed if this particular parcel didn't have some rentals or is the single bedroom really important, I think, because there are a bunch of people. that are really not getting any opportunities here. And I think there's a demand. And I think as much as we idealize what we'd like all this to look like, we need to look at the data and to see who is in need of housing, not just what we idealize this property to be, because we're here to serve the need, not to just, imagine something that's beautiful. I think we can do both and create an attractive property that can meet the need. But I want to make sure that we address the concerns that people have who are in need of housing, not those of us who are just sitting here thinking about what would be good for housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have one hand up online, Rick Levitt.
Yeah, thank you. This is an excellent discussion. It's been really an outstanding discussion. I agree with the previous speaker. We need to have an entire mix, both fill a mix of homes to serve the needs of our working population and our non-working population. Phil Richardson and I, and Steve Buckley and I, Steve and I were neighbors. As I mentioned, my property abuts the Buckley property. Yeah, we want to see a higher density development there. Single family homes, townhomes, as Steve said. The previous speaker just mentioned one-bedroom homes. Over in Brewster, on Brewster Landing, they don't have one-bedroom homes, but they have two-bedroom homes and three-bedroom homes. So, and a village green where the kids can play and can be seen. The home's surrounded. So you can have single-family homes, small, 1,200 square foot homes like Phil has described, excellent. They can go up to 1,500 to 1,600 square feet. I lived in Boston for 10 years in an apartment of 1,000 square feet. So we don't need big homes on big lots. We need smaller homes on small lots that serve the needs of our community. And what I would like to see is what Phil and Steve Buckley have said, developed on the Buckley property, something very much similar to what's been developed over at Brewster Landing in Brewster. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a very quick comment on the rentals, which I agree. I've spent a lot of time talking to 30 and 40-year-olds who work in the medical fields. Some of them travel, some of them are not here all the time. Some of them work in the hospital for a year and then go to another hospital, another location. So they're all looking for rentals. I've talked to many, many people that work at CBI and other restaurants. At CBI, a lot of people that work there pay $150 a month for a very small bedroom situation. If you multiply that, you can figure out what they could pay for a whole year. That's not a lot of money. Is it even possible? It's what?
200 a week now per person.
Okay, okay, thank you. But the point being, can we build new affordable housing that we can rent for that little money? Because there is that need, no question about it. There's a big need within that lower price range, and they're hard workers, and some of them have 2 jobs. Some of them work CBI some hours, and then they go over and work CVS the rest of the time. They barely get any sleep. They have to sign contracts to stay here for 3 years, and if they go back to their Jamaica or wherever they really live, they have to pay for it. So keep that in mind on this rental and affordable housing issue.
Thank you. Yep, all right. So I'm going to move on and just give a brief overview of the Meeting House Road property, which again, a key difference there.
I'd like to make, excuse me, I'd like to make one comment about the previous speaker, very briefly.
Okay.
Thank you. Absolutely. as Shireen Davis said a little earlier in the program this evening, it's possible to have some of these homes, single homes or attached homes, townhouses, be rental properties. The town can own them. They can buy them from the developer and rent them to the people who need rentals. And even in a rent-to-own wonderful program like the Marconi program. It's all very possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Question?
I'm Jeff Fugelstad. If you get the trend of part of the theme, I was a banker for 34 years. My objective in dealing with all sizes of companies and with people is I need to get repaid. That was the gist of it. Now, with regard to rentals, we've talked to several people, my wife and I, who don't think they'll ever be able to move here because of the amount of money that's necessary to live or rent, buy, etc. What is your estimate of what it would cost a family to live in a rental or to buy a house that was $200,000 to $300,000 to build? Do you have information on that subject?
We're actually not. It's a fair question, and actually, we're not doing a feasibility study at this point. We really don't have the data to answer that. I can certainly tell you that based on work we just finished for the town of Orleans, for the Governor Prince property, we were involved in that as well, that there's a real challenge here in the lower and outer Cape areas in terms of trying to create that level of affordability without some pretty significant subsidy support from state or federal programs. So reaching the people who actually work in hospitality or just any sort of local employment here, it's a real challenge. And that's going to be the same whether people are trying to move here from another community, but they're in that income range.
Well, in my estimation, the amount of money is key.
Yes.
A family has to be making so much. The other question I have is, there seems to be a two-themed approach to housing in town. One is for young people who wish to send their children to school, and the other is for seniors who would wish to stay here.
Yep.
What is the idea? What are your ideas with regard to where people who have school-aged children, where they would live? What kind of communities would they be a part of? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think that's what we're trying to find out from you folks, actually, is how you see those. I mean, as planners, yes, we have thoughts on it, but it's not our property and it's not our town, and we're trying to find out what you folks want to see and what kinds of environments you think are appropriate for different types of household needs. I will just want to point out, because you're absolutely right about people have to be able to afford whatever the housing is that they're seeking to rent or buy. But the developer, in order to build the housing, has to get a bank loan from somebody to build it. So, long before anyone is applying to a lottery to rent or own a house, there is this basic feasibility assessment that has to be done by the developer and by whoever the lender is going to be, or lenders are going to be for that project. So, this is a big hurdle that anything of these projects is going to have to go through. It's not just about what they look like, and it's really not even just about who are the populations we're trying to serve. It's how do you make the construction of a project affordable in this environment, and then what can you actually expect to attain for rents or sale prices, and you have to close a gap somehow. And that gap is either closed by local funds or state funds or federal funds or some source that's going to close those gaps and make a feasible project.
Understood. However, the bottom line, again, is finance.
Of course.
With regard to various developments, various houses, various townhouse approaches, there's got to be a bottom line.
Yep.
And that should be presented to this group. There should be an idea that says, $200,000 to support a home and a family. That should be key to to getting the discussion off the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you can go on.
Yep. Okay, so for the Meeting House Road property, okay, where is my mouse? Sorry, I'm struggling here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so just a reminder, a key difference with this property is that the units on this property would be 100% affordable. Now, what that income threshold would look like, I think, that's not determined. So that it would need to be, you know, by definition for the Affordable Housing Trust, Katie, I believe the parameters we had talked about was no more than 100% AMI. But if it was at that level, it wouldn't go on the subsidized housing inventory. And the town is aware of that, but at least it's addressing a need. So that's one thing to consider. But so these units, all of them would have to be up to that point. It could certainly be lower than that 100% AMI, but as Judy just mentioned, there's a lot of kind of project feasibility questions that would need to come into play before anything is built. So again, because this was acquired exclusively with housing trust funds, all of the units on this property would be affordable, unlike the Main Street property. And so I know Gloria already went over this background, but again, just I want to point out it's about 3.5 acres. And one thing that's also noteworthy here, just to point out, there's not much that, while the town kind of lost that acreage that they assumed originally was part of the property, the rail trail goes right through here, and so and there's a lot of kind of challenging topography in this area as well. So that's, you know, one thing to keep in mind, that even though that part of the property is no longer included, that likely wouldn't have been where development would be focused anyway. So just some kind of key points about this property. Unlike the Main Street property, which we mentioned was relatively flat with that kind of gentle slope toward the back, the topography here is more varied. There's a lot of elevation changes, more pronounced on the front portion of the lot that I'll show you on a map in just a minute. And then so it kind of drops down and then goes up, but it becomes flat. And so that's kind of going to be interesting to figure out the access for where you know, the access will come into the parcel. But that's where our friends at Dodson and Flinker will come and tell us what's possible. So this, unlike the Main Street property, which did kind of have a variety of uses and zoning around it, this is really surrounded primarily with residential uses. And we had a member of our audience today point out that's kind of a lot of smaller homes and kind of, you know, being aware of the neighborhood context there. It does also abut some town-owned conservation land in the rear. So while I did say it's primarily residential, there is some kind of mix there. There's a property next to it that's mixed use with a medical facility and an apartment. And then kind of down the road on Meeting House Road, there is an industrial zoned park. So this is residential 60, which is, you know, larger lot sizes than the Main Street property. Again, depending on the permitting route the town goes through, the zoning may not apply to what gets developed on this site, but again, it's good for understanding that neighborhood context. So you can see here, compared to the Main Street property where these elevation lines were much more spread out, the fact that they're so close here indicates kind of steeper changes in your topography, because those lines are placed every time there's a change 3 meters, about 10 feet in elevation. So the closer they are, the steeper the changes. It looks like I don't have the whole parcel here, but you can see they start to get more spread out. So it does get a higher elevation in the back, but it becomes much more flat. And then back here, this is that conservation land I was mentioning. I'm sorry, I know if you're on the computer, you won't be able to see my little laser pen, and it looks like my mouse isn't showing up either. But right behind the property to the west is conservation land, the Twine Field. And that's that industrial zoning, that gray area that I mentioned. But the rest of this is zoned for residential. So you can see all of, you know, those kind of single-family home subdivisions. So now looking, kind of considering again that this would be 100% affordable, considering kind of the uniqueness of the geography, there's nothing on it right now. the proximity to the rail trail. There's actually like parking for the rail trail. I want to say it's right across the way. So that is just beautiful. We walked it the other day. We'd like to hear what you think makes sense for this site.
Come on.
Yeah, I would love to see home ownership on this property, single-family homes, dense, obviously very attractive. I think we could make a really nice neighborhood there. But I certainly wouldn't be opposed if you ended up doing rentals there, but I think it'd be well-suited in the neighborhood to be single-family homes, and I'd rather do more rentals over at the Buckley property. But those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, come on up.
Gloria Hicks again at 95 Meeting House Road. I'm one house over from this property.
Yep.
And the geography is challenging, and I'm very curious how it's going to be handled. From Route 137, it dips down. There's an easement road that two of us on that street own. How are you going to get into the development? Hopefully, it's directly from Route 137, because I'll lose a lot of frontage, a lot of privacy. It increases a lot of traffic, noise, and problems for me and my neighbors. So I'm very curious as to how you're going to handle that dip in the road.
And we'll be able to address that better when the landscape architects join us for the next meeting.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
and,
you.
Yeah, and so we walked it, Gloria, Peter Flinker, and myself, we walked the property, and you're right, it is quite a dip, and then it goes back up, and so that is, it's a challenge that Peter in his concepts will take into consideration, and that's, again, the beauty of having multiple concepts to discuss and kind of see what makes the most sense. And also, I think public safety and whatnot would have to be part of that conversation, because the access, there's certain parameters that would have to be met for wherever the housing ends up being built on the lot, whether it ends up being built toward the back and there's, an access road that has to get to it just because that's where it's more flat, or anything else. That'd be a conversation that would need to be had with other
Okay.
key parties in town.
And again, just keeping the housing in line with the neighborhood. The houses are not large, and we have a lot of privacy right now with trees and whatnot. And I really feel strongly, as I said before, about having a management company, keeping these so that we have a contact person, because there are already existing issues in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the trees, that's an excellent point, because there is nothing on the property right now, unlike Main Street, and that's, a consideration of what will be cleared with regard to the kind of neighborhood context. We talked a lot about that on our site walk.
Very quick comment. Because of the elevations, I assume the architects will probably come up with something where they use that elevation. When you build on a hill, you actually kind of get a free lower level, which if done well and attractively. So your frontage could be on the road with a more colonial look, and looking out into the woods could be a lower level. So it's a very reasonable way to build.
And I'm sure he'll take that into account. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think it would be important to have access to the bike trail, and also the twine field is passive recreation, even though it's conservation land, and access to the twine field. I think that will balance out some green and open space that the neighborhood might need.
Yes, I was wondering, on the map there, there's a parcel that looks like it's landlocked. There's no house on it. Can you
Yep, I'll put it back.
expand on that, or like who owns it, or what?
So,
See, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, are you referring to this or up here?
Okay. So your mouse doesn't work?
I know, it's quite frustrating. It's not showing up on the screen.
Okay, because,
but-
yeah, the people online
I know, I know.
can't see the,
So, okay, so.
Go ahead.
If we look at the north arrow, just I'll explain it to my friends online. So, I believe Mr. Buckley is referring to north of the property, this landlocked property, is that what you're referring to?
Correct, I was
Yep,
curious
and
about
then there's now, because of the way this survey was done of the site, there are actually also 2 parcels down here that are landlocked as well. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone on the town side, that it is unknown ownership of this one. And then these, they have some potential owners that have, like on the plan of land, I know it said possibly with some names identified, but I believe it's unknown. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the parcel to the north, it is unknown, and it's something that we have thought that we will likely look into as we move through this process. The parcels below, one is owned by heirs of a person who had passed away, and the other parcel there's an unknown, we know who the owner was many years ago, but we don't have a trail to who would be that owner at this point in time. And so those are other, we're looking into those parcels. So we are looking into the, potential ownership of those parcels, or whether or not it would make sense at all to even consider them for part of this development.
Thank you, thank you. And again, I realize I didn't explain the other property that we were talking about is in that, the kind of southwest, where it kind of makes that triangle. I'm just trying to explain it for my friends online because you can't see my mouse. But yeah, so those landlocked properties are what Mr. Buckley was referring to.
okay, yeah. I used to do research for owners unknown, and the thing is that there are owners. They just don't know it.
Yeah.
The second, third cousin or whatever, of whoever owned it, so it's a matter of researching. And yeah, so it would be nice to know, I guess, at this point, before going too much further, find out who or if that northern, at least the northern one, belongs to, in case, in case the town wants to step in and scoop it up. And the other part was that, yes, as Shireen was saying, to be able to use the twine field right there. I mean, I was talking earlier about former Buckley property, being able to have a place where kids could play, and geez, that's just begging. It's like, it's so great that there'll be some access there. And so anything that was built, though, I would say that, yes, the idea being that the buildings would be placed in such a way that would not prevent access from the residents, that to be easy access to walk over and take a walk and so forth and so on. So, and I should point out, just for FYI, there is similar for the former Buckley property across the street from that. There's conservation land there too, so the kids can play there too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, come on up, and then you, and then in the back, it's fine.
Super quick, as someone who lives on Meeting House Road, I completely agree that single-family homes would be perfect here. Ironically, this is a neighborhood that a lot of us moved to because it was the only place left we could afford to move to. So I'd love to keep it sort of having that feel of like, and it's not just young families, it's older people, it's a mix of people, but it's really a great neighborhood because it's where we all had to go because it was the only place left to buy about 10 years ago. It's local, yeah, it's great. So we love it, and we would love to keep it in keeping with what's there.
Okay, thank you.
Last time, Joan Craig again. I'm not familiar with a lot of that area. However, it reminds me of Gomes Way in Harwich. I don't know if anyone's ever been there. It has more space with regards to the acreage. However, the houses are 2 and 3 bedroom, I believe, and they're sweet. They're cottages. They're small but lovely. People keep them really nicely arranged. It's in a cul-de-sac, and they're not overwhelming, so something like that, or working with the architectural design of the current meeting house. But that area is really quite nicely done. I think this area, it might be a little more dense as far as having the houses closer together. But even in Gomes, if you had more houses there, it would still look really good. So something like that would be very comfortable.
Yeah, it's a nice project.
Thank you.
Other comments? Or questions? Okay.
So thank you for all of that feedback. We will discuss it with our team at Dodson and with town staff, and make sure that that kind of gets incorporated into what will happen at the next meeting. And we hope to see you there. I'm going to briefly go over next steps and how you can keep aware of this process. I really appreciated the suggestion of having a project page, and we will discuss how to, if that's feasible with staff. But at the very least, we do have a suggestion in the meantime. So let me just go over that with you. Okay. So I put this up earlier, but there will be a visual preference survey we'll be announcing next month, and that will look at things like, not only building type, but also density and kind of general considerations, and there may be some other questions on that survey as well. And then in February, that's when we'll be back here with Dodson and Flinker to kind of show what may be possible based on the constraints of each site and what we heard through the visual preference survey, through this meeting, and so forth. So that is what's coming in the next couple of months. Again, the kind of later part of this process with the third community meeting, that will likely be in the spring, but the date is not determined yet for that, where there will be kind of final concepts presented to the public. And I really want to emphasize again, they are concepts that are meant to inform how the town will draft an RFP for each property for its development. And we'll make sure to kind of go over that process in the second community meeting, because I think that's a really valid point that people are going to want to know. It takes years from where we are right now to have something built on either of these properties, and so giving people kind of a sense of understanding what that will look like. But one way to stay connected with this process, if you aren't already, the main sheet newsletter, I just want to make sure you know how to access that. We talked with staff about making sure that the survey link goes out through that, and also the information about the next community meetings until we get something more solidified on the website. But if you're not signed up for this email newsletter already, if you scroll down to the bottom of the town's website, you'll see, way at the bottom, this Connect with Us. There's a Notify Me link there, and when you click on that, there's all these different newsletters you can sign up for that maybe you are not aware of. Well, I think it's great to sign up for all of them. The one that relates to the town's newsletter, the main sheet, is the government one. So that's under that Notify Me link when you click on that. So that's how you would get. How often does that newsletter come out?
It's weekly.
Weekly, okay. So then you would be on that distribution list if you aren't already. So just want to make sure you're aware of that, and we will make sure next steps are shared through that. But I just want to really thank you all so much for attending, both in person and online. And our emails for the kind of primary project points are up there, and we'll make sure that information, wherever the landing house on the website is there as well for you. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in February.
Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to Barrett Planning Group for leading the meeting tonight.
Thank you.